Welcome to the MI Mental podcast, the podcast where I explore the complex intersections between mental health, the law, and ethics. In this Doctors in Court edition, I'll be discussing a case where a psychologist faced allegations of misconduct following a psychological assessment that led to a patient's placement under TBS. In the Netherlands, TBS is a measure for compulsory treatment. Today, I'll break down the timeline of events and go over the defense put forward by the psychologist and explore the claims of the patient who believes he was treated unfairly. We'll also delve into the disciplinary board's decision, explain key psychological terms, and as always, I'll wrap up with 2 reflective questions for you to think about, and I'll give you my perspective on them. This case centers around the psychologist, along with a psychiatrist, conducted a psychological evaluation on the plaintiff, patient A. The assessment was ordered by a judge as part of a criminal case to determine whether the patient should be placed under compulsory treatment, known as TBS in the Netherlands. In November 2016, the psychologist and the team carried out their psychological assessment. However, the patient refused to cooperate during the evaluation. Despite this, the psychologist and the team concluded that the patient had significant psychological issues and recommended compulsory treatment under TBS. It's a legal measure used for individuals deemed a danger to society due to mental disorders. Based on this assessment, the court ordered the patient to be placed under TBS. Several years later, the patient filed a complaint against the psychologist, alleging that the psychologist had acted inappropriately and unprofessionally during the assessment, and that leaded to his unjust placement under TBS. Let's take a closer look at the timeline of events leading up to this complaint. November 2016. A psychological assessment was ordered by the judge to evaluate the patient's mental state and determine if compulsory treatment under TBS was necessary. The patient refused to cooperate with the assessment, but the evaluation proceeded based on observations and available information from family members and previous medical records. December 2016. The clinical psychologist, along with a psychiatrist, submitted a report to the court recommending compulsory treatment for the patient. They concluded that the patient suffered from severe psychological issues and posed a potential threat to society. In January 2021, the patient filed a complaint against the clinical psychologist, claiming that the psychological assessment was biased, it was inaccurate, and had led to his unwarranted placement under TBS. He accused the psychologist of misconduct, citing intimidation, unprofessionalism, and a lack of thorough investigation into his psychological state. In August 2021, the disciplinary board reviewed the case and the psychologist's conduct during the assessment. The plaintiff, the patient, raised several key complaints against the psychologist. Number 1, intimidation and involvement of family. The patient claimed that the psychologist intimidated him by involving his mother in the assessment, which he viewed as a violation of his privacy and an attempt to undermine him. Number 2, bias and lack of objectivity. The patient alleged that the psychologist's assessment was biased and that the psychologist had a predetermined notion of his mental state, leading to a report that lacked neutrality. The patient argued that the psychologist ignored the findings of his previous psychiatrist, who had a different view of his mental condition. Number 3, ridicule and personal attacks. The patient also accused the psychologist of ridiculing his past achievements, particularly his involvement in sports, and claimed that the psychologist's unprofessional behavior during the assessment contributed to an unfair portrayal of his character in the final report. Number 4, failure to conduct thorough medical examinations. The patient argued that the psychologist neglected to conduct essential medical examinations such as blood tests to assess his stress levels, which could have provided crucial context regarding his psychological state. Number 5, wrongful recommendation of TBS. The patient's core argument was that the psychologist's biased assessment led to his wrongful placement under TBS, which he believed was unnecessary and caused undue suffering. Now, let's take a look at how the psychologist defended these serious accusations. Number 1, intimidation claims. The psychologist explained that as part of the standard assessment process, the psychologist's team gathered information from relevant individuals, including family members. The involvement of the patient's mother was a common and accepted practice, particularly in cases where the patient refuses to cooperate. Family input can provide valuable insight into the patient's childhood, the development, and behavior patterns. Number 2, bias and objectivity. The psychologist strongly denied any bias, arguing that the psychological assessment followed a structured, objective approach. The fact that the patient refused to cooperate limited the depth of the assessment, but the psychologist and the team noted this limitation in the final report. They made it clear that certain conclusions could not be fully drawn due to the patient's lack of participation. Number 3, ridicule and professional conduct. The psychologist disputed the claim that the patient's past achievements were ridiculed. The psychologist maintained that the references to the patient's past were relevant to understanding his psychological development, and the psychologist emphasized that at no point was the tone of the report meant to belittle or undermine the patient. 4, medical examination. The psychologist explained that there was no indication for blood tests or other medical examinations as part of the psychological evaluation. The focus was on assessing the patient's mental state through interviews, through observations, and input from other professionals involved in his care. Recommendation for TBS, the last claim. The psychologist defended the recommendation of TBS, stating that it was based on the available information and professional judgment. Even though the patient had refused to cooperate, the report provided a comprehensive evaluation of the available evidence, and the conclusion was reached in line with established clinical standards. Let's now turn to the disciplinary board's decision on this case. Regarding intimidation and family involvement, the board determined that the involvement of the patient's mother in the assessment was appropriate, given the patient's refusal to participate. The input from family members is considered a valuable part of psychological evaluations, particularly when the subject of the evaluation declines to provide information. Regarding bias and objectivity, the board found no evidence of bias in the psychologist's assessment. The final report clearly noted the limitations caused by the patient's non-cooperation, and the conclusions were consistent with the available data. The board acknowledged that the psychologist took reasonable steps to ensure objectivity throughout the evaluation. Regarding ridicule and professionalism, the board rejected the claim that the patient was ridiculed during the assessment. They found no evidence to suggest that the psychologist acted unprofessionally or that the patient's past achievements were belittled in the report. Regarding medical examinations, the board confirmed that there was no need for additional medical examinations, such as blood tests in this case. The psychological evaluation was focused on assessing the patient's mental state, and the methodology used was appropriate for that purpose. And lastly, recommendation for TBS. The board upheld the recommendation of TBS. They ruled that the psychologist's decision was well-founded and based on the available information, even considering the patient's lack of cooperation. And the board concluded that the psychologist acted within the bounds of professional conduct and that the complaint was unfounded. In the end, the disciplinary board declared the complaint unfounded and cleared the psychologist of any misconduct. Let's take a moment to explain a couple of key terms that were central to this case. TBS. In the Dutch legal system, TBS is a measure of compulsory psychiatric treatment for individuals who have committed a serious crime but are deemed to have mental health issues that contribute to the offense. It's used to both treat the individual and protect society from future harm. Forensic psychological evaluation. This is an assessment conducted by the mental health professionals to evaluate an individual's psychological state, often as part of a legal process. And the goal is to determine whether mental health issues might affect the individual's criminal responsibility or pose a risk to society. And these terms help to clarify the context of the psychologist's assessment and the legal framework in which this case unfolded. This case highlights the challenges mental health professionals face when conducting forensic evaluations, especially when the patient is non-cooperative. The psychologist in this case followed established protocols and provided a thorough, objective report despite the limitations. The disciplinary board ultimately supported the psychologist's actions, which demonstrates the importance of maintaining professional standards in such high-stakes evaluation. Before we wrap up, here are 2 questions to think about. How should psychologists balance gathering essential information with respecting a patient's refusal to cooperate, especially in forensic settings? Well, psychologists must rely on alternative sources of information, such as family members or past medical records, when a patient refuses to cooperate. Maintaining objectivity and clearly documenting limitations in the final report are essential to ensuring the assessment is thorough and fair. Question number 2. What steps can mental health professionals take to ensure their evaluations remain unbiased even when the patient is uncooperative? I think it's important to follow established protocols and seek input from multiple sources and remain transparent about the limitations caused by lack of cooperation. And documenting every step of the evaluation process ensures that the conclusions are based on evidence rather than personal bias. Thank you for joining me today on this deep dive into the complexities of forensic psychological assessments and legal responsibility. If you find this episode insightful, share it with others and subscribe for more discussions on the